Getting a little bit funky there in the intro, maybe just a tiny amount. Guys, welcome back. This is Eric here with Guitarsenal, and today I thought that funkiness might be just a slight springboard for the subject we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking a little bit about bending strings and vibrato. More about vibrato than bending strings, but I feel like the true voice of a guitar really comes from the hands. You know, you always hear people say, "Oh, it's playing in the hands." You know, how much about equipment has to do with the gear, and how much of it has to do with the hands. And I think that sort of misnomer that gets passed around is because vibrato and bends and the way that you approach those things give the guitar a very unique voice that is suited to you as the player. So really, part of the issue with me teaching vibrato or bends is that you really have to develop your own style. Everybody approaches the guitar a little bit different of a way. Once you figure out chords and scales and you figure out little runs and just things that are fun and things you want to mess around with, then you start to determine, okay, well, I want to find a way to make this sound more musical, right? And that's the big issue with people is they want guitar or the instrument they play to be more musical for them. And they're often kind of stalemated because they don't really know how to break out of that bubble, right? You know, once you've learned scales and you learned all these things, where do you develop a technique that makes the guitar your voice, right? And I feel like that's done by the way of different vibrato. And vibrato techniques is literally your voice when it comes to the way that you impart your sound on the instrument. So when I'm placing vibrato on a note, I'm basically bending the string slightly out of tune technically. Okay, whether the way that you put vibrato on a string makes it go a little bit sharp or a little bit flat or kind of neutral, everybody's vibrato technique imparts that little bit of a singing characteristic on the note. If I take a note, and let's just say I don't vibrate my hand, but let's say I just do like a violin player would. Listen to, I'm going to put just a bit of drive on this, okay, just to really accentuate what I'm trying to do. If I take this note like a violin player and I go, there's a little bit of space in that fret where the note is a little bit different. Listen. Hear that? Listen to that. You can, if you listen carefully, you can hear that kind of semitone. Listen real hard. Hear it jump in and out? So vibrato takes those extremes and you're sort of just applying a singing characteristic to the guitar. And there's really no way I can explain it other than you just have to really develop your own style for doing it. Notice what I'm doing with my right hand when I do that. My right hand, I'm anchoring it on the two higher strings so that I don't accidentally hit that string. I want that string to resonate and I don't want anything to get in the way of that note. So a lot of times you'll see, and I'm just giving you a technique that you can use. So vibrato is usually in conjunction with some form of a bend. It doesn't always have to be a bend. You look at B.B. King, I'm going to get just a little bit more top end on this. You look at B.B. King and he had a very characteristic vibrato style on the high E string. Okay, you don't have a lot of real estate there. On this string, let's say I go on the G string. I can bend, I can waver in one area back and forth if I want, but on the high E string, the characteristic that I have to pay attention to is I don't have that ability, so I have to give more of a... That's probably the hardest type of vibrato to do is on the high E string because you have such limited real estate. The best way I can explain to do like sort of B.B. King style of vibrato is grab the string kind of close to the fret, and it's really a lot of it's in the wrist. You don't have to anchor, but you can. I've got my thumb anchored on top of the neck. You can anchor. Now see how I bent that half step up with my index finger? You've also got to be able to do it with your ring finger. Okay, so like if I go... And I've got to be able to put vibrato on that note if I walk up... So that's one vibrato technique, is to use the high E strings. And guys, it's not easy, okay? It's very difficult to do. All right? So that's an important vibrato technique to employ and keep in your playing. Another vibrato technique that is difficult and something that a lot of guitarists need to learn is how to bend and apply vibrato onto a bent note. And it's probably one of the hardest things to do in guitar playing, and to do it right and to make it believable. If I'm, let's just say I'm still in the key of B flat. It gives a very singing characteristic, especially if I dial out some of the tone on this high-end pickup. And you get a very vocal characteristic in your playing by incorporating bends and vibrato. You're singing, right? So it's a form of singing. You're singing through your instrument. So that's the best way to think about it. So you've got the characteristic of adding in the high end E string for vibrato. And I'm basically using my index finger and my ring finger. You can also use your pinky finger. So if you reach up and you grab a high note, I don't use the pinky finger often. One way I might use the pinky finger is if, let's say, all right, we're in B flat, right? If I go B flat and I go... That's one way to do it. So high E string. Okay, in the middle of the neck, bending on the B string up to the tonic. So if I'm in, let's just say B flat. Now that's one of my favorite ones too. When you're bending, and that's a very, very difficult lick to master, is basically all I'm doing, I'm literally just fluttering around one note, okay? If I'm in the key of B flat and I want to, and the chord changes to a 4 chord, and I want to get crazy, I can do that on any string within the scale. So that just gives you something to think about, is getting, bending and vibrato. Also, bends that are, you can bend a half step, you can bend the whole step, you can also bend 1.5 and even 2 steps in some cases. So a popular bend that you've probably heard in blues music is when B.B. King does this. So again, we're in B flat. Okay, he's bending 1.5 steps. That's very, very difficult to do. So don't get frustrated if you can't hold it in pitch. The best thing to do, in my opinion, on something like that is to just practice trying to hold that note in pitch. So like if I'm in B flat, I'm bending up to that A flat, okay? Very difficult. Then one thing that you can do is you can do a 1.5 step bend and put vibrato on it, which is getting into even stupider territory, but lost on the fretboard there. That's for free. That's a free mistake. But that's when mastering those techniques, whether it's vibrato or bending or a combination of the two, any note you want, you can make it sing with a little bit of practice and sort of putting it all in the right place. So then there's bending strings and sliding in positions while bending strings. Now that's something I learned from David Gilmour, and also learned it from Derek Trucks. The reason I learned it from Derek Trucks is because Derek Trucks plays slide. So he slides all over the place. Of course he changes positions. He changes positions 1 billion times while he plays. But I don't play slide, so I don't get that luxury. So that means if I want to add a certain flourish, or if I want to hammer off or pull onto a note, I have to do it in the context of moving my position in an odd way. So bending while moving positions is something that is a very difficult thing to master. Okay, and I'll let you know kind of how that sounds. Again, I'm in B flat. If I'm in B flat, so you can only do that by changing positions. All right. So if I'm, so instead of hammering on, I'll slide into a position. So that's another kind of bending technique, is doing hammer on. So if I slide into that position instead of hammering on, it allows me to change my position. Okay? So if I hammered onto that note, That's all good and fine. Okay, if I want to stay in this position, sure, I'll hammer on in that manner. But if I want to change my position to a higher position, so I was with my ring finger on the tonic. Don't underestimate a half-step bend as well. You can see where I bent into that third in the key of B flat. Our third is going to be a D. So there with my index finger, I'm bending a whole step up and then retarding back a half step and then putting vibrato on the note. So it's actually 3 distinct movements that I'm making when I play that. Now, if you really want to get in Robert Cray territory, and the way Robert Cray would do it, Robert Cray would do more of a... You see how much is actually in that one little position, and I'm not doing a whole heck of a lot with my hand to get those sounds. It's just the way I approach them, and by bending strings and by using vibrato, I can apply the sort of vocal technique to what I'm doing, and I don't have to really get into a ridiculous amount of trouble with how I don't have to move my hands fast. I don't have to change positions of my hands. I just have to bend the strings, right? If you tried to play those notes without bending them or putting vibrato on them, it would just sound robotic and boring. It wouldn't have any character to it. Sure, you could figure out where those notes are. But again, that's getting into like why Hendrix's style of playing guitar is so difficult, because Hendrix very much so would kind of, was a very pressure sensitive player in terms of how the pressure of his hand would play on the fretboard to really almost kind of push harder or softer and kind of bend certain notes in certain areas. Is a very distinctive way of getting behind the guitar. Don't be afraid to get a little bit silly and hammer in and change your positions, and don't be afraid to put a little vibrato on the note. If at first you can't figure out a good technique for vibrato, don't be afraid to experiment and play around a little bit. The guitar is a very expressive instrument. It's an easy instrument to get to sound bad if you're not careful. And it's also an easy instrument to get to sound really good too. But just understand that a lot of the sounds that you hear on a guitar, they're being approached from a lot of different ways. Okay, it's not just playing a scale. You've got to approach it from a standpoint that makes it sound musical and vocal. And that means employing your bends, vibrato, and getting that hand strength built up where you can put vibrato on a note, any position on the neck, at any situation, no matter where you bend a note or wherever you get to, you can make it happen. All right? And that's outside of scales, that's outside of riffing. None of that even matters if you don't employ a good vocal technique to give you a unique sound to your instrument. And that's my kind of take on it. You guys take it for what you will. That's just the way I approach it. And also you can sort of flub through some things a little bit. When you employ some bending, your let's just say your situational awareness on the neck is not quite as important. Okay, let's say I get stuck in, all right, we were in B flat. If I get stuck in an odd position where I may not know exactly where I'm at, let's say I'm... I know that B flat is right there, and I always just follow the rule of, in a pentatonic, I know that a step and a half is always going to be like my first go, right? I know that that's always going to be the case, no matter where I'm at on the neck. And if I know where my positions are on the neck, I can utilize bends and vibrato to impart some different sounds. You almost heard right there the different sounds that I'm getting just even by changing my position on the neck, and even the strings, the order that I play them in, or let's just say where I place the vibrato and with which finger can change, right? So see right there, in that position, I can bend up to that tonic on the G string, and it gives a completely different type of sound. There's another style of vibrato you can employ, is more of the floating style of vibrato that Clapton is known for. Eric Clapton's vibrato, he doesn't necessarily anchor on the guitar very heavily. He lets the guitar kind of move and shake. You saw right there. That's more of Eric Clapton's style of vibrato. All right, so see, I'm not anchoring. So I utilize all of those techniques, and honestly, the more floating style of vibrato, where you're not really grabbing the guitar quite so heavily and you're just really getting in on that one note, you'll notice Clapton does it a good bit. That type of vibrato is probably one of the easiest types of vibrato to learn for a beginner. It's probably concentrating on the B string to start out with, in my opinion, or maybe the G string. The E string vibrato techniques and bends are going to be maybe a little bit harder for some folks, but I find that it's easier to just show people. All right, so there's a David Gilmour lick. I didn't exactly go over, we were talking about changing positions on bends, getting into... more of a... If you think about it, it's a slide lick, right? David Gilmour just decided to integrate it with a sliding technique. It's actually a very hard technique to master and make it sound musical. Is to take that, like, especially you like Shine On You Crazy Diamond, we're in G, right? If we go... right? So anyway, hopefully that gives you some different techniques to go on. That's not the whole bag of tricks, but definitely gets you in the right direction. Hopefully, maybe some of you guys can learn something from this video. Bends and vibrato are a really important thing to integrate into your playing. And don't get frustrated if you don't find your voice on the guitar overnight. It's probably the hardest technique and the hardest stuff on guitar to master is bends and vibrato. And then developing hybrid picking techniques and a little bit more speed, that's probably on up there as well. I would say that that's really, in my opinion, when I look at a guitar player, when I view a guitar player, when I'm listening to a guitar player, I want to hear that guitar player's unique voice. I want to hear what he does on the guitar. I want to hear bends. I want to hear vibrato. I want to hear expressiveness. I want to hear some crazy stuff going on. I want to hear some of those sort of odd flubs and nuances that are in there. And if I don't hear that, I don't know. That, to me, that's just a hallmark of a truly unique voice of a guitar player. Listen to Gary Moore or Robert Cray, or you listen to, you know, Jimi Hendrix, you listen to Robin Ford, any of those guys, and they all have a very unique vibrato characteristic, some unique bends going on, and you can always tell that it's them. It's by the voice of their guitar. If I listen to 10 different guys shredding on a guitar, don't get me wrong, it's effing impressive. It's very impressive. Especially, man, when I pull up videos on YouTube and I see these like 12 and 13-year-olds just going nuts, like that is very, very, very impressive. And don't get me wrong, it is a technical prowess that, you know, maybe at my age, I'm never going to learn that way, okay? But if I listen to 10 people like that, I'm hearing the same exact thing over and over and over again. I can't tell them apart in terms of, you know, the characteristic. Unless, you know, maybe Yngwie Malmsteen, now he's got a pretty dang unique way of doing things, and also Yngwie employs some beautiful vibrato and bends into his playing, which give it a very unique and vocal characteristic. So guys, remember, part of making the guitar really sound good is making it sing, and the way you make it sing is through use of bends and vibrato. So don't be afraid to bend on the strings, don't be afraid to experiment, don't be afraid to develop your voice on the instrument. Hopefully you guys learned something from this video. Thank you so much for watching today. We post every Monday and Friday here on Guitarsenal. Make sure that you are subscribed and that you click that notification bell. We really appreciate all of your viewership and your support. And thank you for watching today's video. Guys, get out there and bend on some strings. Employ a little bit of vibrato. You're not going to hurt nothing. Have yourselves a great day.